The Cafe Encounter. Naomi Carter sat in a bustling cafe on the edge of downtown, sipping her latte and scrolling through the encrypted files on her tablet. Dressed casually in a tailored blazer and dark jeans, she blended seamlessly into the crowd of tech entrepreneurs, college students, and busy professionals. Her posture was relaxed, but her mind was sharp, attuned to every detail around her. She wasn't there for the coffee or ambience. She was there on assignment. Naomi was an undercover FBI agent, and her current mission was to infiltrate a sophisticated drug trafficking ring that had been using legitimate local businesses to launder millions. Her target today was Sylvia Rodriguez, the cafe owner, suspected of acting as a key liaison in the operation. Sylvia had no idea she was under investigation, and Naomi intended to keep it that way. Her role was to play a freelance journalist doing the story on successful minority-owned businesses, a perfect cover to get close to Sylvia. As Naomi adjusted the strap of her shoulder bag, ensuring the tiny recording device inside was positioned correctly, she noticed the door swing open. A tall man in a police uniform entered, his presence instantly shifting the cafe's atmosphere. Conversations quieted, and heads turned in his direction. Naomi recognized him immediately, Officer Mark Connors. Connors was known throughout the city for his bold demeanor and questionable judgment. He was the kind of cop who thrived on authority and didn't shy away from exercising it, often at the expense of nuance or fairness. Naomi had encountered him briefly during a joint task force meeting months ago. He was sharp, but his tendency to jump to conclusions had made him a liability more than once. Today, Connors seemed particularly alert. His eyes scanned the room with a practiced authority, landing briefly on Naomi before moving on. She didn't flinch but felt his gaze linger just long enough to set her nerves on edge. Naomi had learned to remain composed under scrutiny, but something about Connors' demeanor warned her that this encounter might not go as planned. Sylvia appeared from behind the counter, a warm smile on her face as she greeted Connors. "Good afternoon, Officer Connors. Coffee's on the house, as usual." "Thanks, Sylvia," Connors replied, his tone friendly but firm. "Actually, I'm not here for coffee today. I need to ask a few questions about some unusual activity in the area." Naomi's instincts went into overdrive. Connors wasn't just there for casual inquiries. His body language suggested he was hunting for something or someone. She lowered her gaze to her tablet, pretending to be engrossed in her work while listening intently to the conversation. Sylvia's smile faltered slightly. "Unusual activity. Is there something I should be concerned about?" "Nothing too alarming," Connors said, though his voice carried an undercurrent of suspicion. "Just routine checks. But while I'm here..." He glanced around the cafe again, his eyes landing back on Naomi. "Mind if I speak to some of your customers?" Naomi's heart rate quickened. She knew she had to act natural, but Connor's attention was now squarely on her. He walked over, his boots thudding against the polished wood floor. "Excuse me, miss," Connors said, his tone polite but authoritative. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Naomi looked up, her expression calm and mildly curious. "Of course, officer. Is something wrong?" "Not necessarily," he replied, pulling out a small notepad. "Just doing some routine checks. May I ask what brings you here today?" Naomi smiled, keeping her demeanor light. "I'm a freelance journalist working on a feature about local businesses. Sylvia's Cafe came highly recommended, so I thought I'd check it out." Connors nodded but didn't seem entirely convinced. "Journalist hot. Got any credentials on you?" Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out a carefully crafted press pass, complete with her alias and a fake publication. Connors examined it closely, his brow furrowing slightly. "Impressive. Mind if I take a quick photo of this for reference?" Naomi hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Sure, if it helps." Connors snapped a picture with his phone, then returned the pass. "Thanks. And your name is Naomi? Interesting name." Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. "It's not that unusual." "No, it's not," Connors said, his tone neutral. "But I like to know who I'm talking to. You see, we've had some issues in the area lately. Suspicious characters coming and going. You haven't seen anything out of the ordinary, have you?" Naomi shook her head. "Nothing at all. The cafe seems pretty peaceful." Connors studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. Enjoy your coffee." As Connors walked away, Naomi exhaled slowly, her pulse steadying. She had managed to deflect his suspicions for now, but she knew the encounter wasn't over. Connors was the kind of officer who thrived on digging deeper, and his interest in her wasn't something she could afford to ignore. Naomi turned her attention back to Sylvia, who had resumed her spot behind the counter. The cafe owner was chatting with another customer, her demeanor warm and welcoming as always. But Naomi noticed a subtle tension in Sylvia's movements, a slight stiffness in her smile. Connors's visit had rattled her, even if she tried to hide it. Naomi decided it was time to make her move. She stood and approached the counter, her tablet tucked under her arm. "Sylvia," she said, her tone friendly, "do you have a moment to chat? I'd love to hear more about how you started this place." Sylvia's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Of course. Let's grab a seat." As they settled at a corner table, Naomi began her line of questioning, skillfully weaving in inquiries about Sylvia's business practices and connections under the guise of journalistic curiosity. Sylvia spoke openly, her passion for the cafe evident in every word. But as the conversation deepened, Naomi sensed an underlying hesitation, a guardedness that suggested Sylvia wasn't sharing everything. Meanwhile, out of the corner of her eye, Naomi noticed Connors lingering near the door, his gaze occasionally drifting toward their table. He wasn't leaving, and his presence was becoming increasingly problematic. Naomi decided to test the waters. "Sylvia, do you ever feel like you're under extra scrutiny, being a minority business owner in this part of town?" Sylvia hesitated, her smile fading slightly. "Sometimes, but you learn to deal with it. It's just part of the territory." Naomi nodded, her expression empathetic. "I can imagine. Must be tough." As the conversation continued, Naomi's earpiece buzzed softly in her ear. It was her handler, Agent Williams. "Naomi, we've got a potential problem. Connors isn't just here for routine checks. We think he's been tipped off about the laundering operation." Naomi's stomach tightened, but her face remained calm. "Understood," she whispered under her breath. She had to think fast. Connors was watching, Sylvia was hiding something, and the mission was suddenly more precarious than ever. Naomi's years of training had prepared her for high-pressure situations, but the stakes were rising with every passing moment. For now, all she could do was keep playing her role and hope that her cover, and her target, would hold. An uneasy alliance. Naomi's mind raced as she maintained her composed demeanor, nodding attentively to Sylvia's anecdotes about starting the cafe. Her handler's words echoed in her ear. "Connors isn't just here for routine checks. We think he's been tipped off about the laundering operation." That changed everything. If Connors had any inkling of Sylvia's involvement in illegal activities, he could jeopardize the entire investigation. His brash style might scare Sylvia into running, or worse, destroy critical evidence before the FBI could gather it. Naomi knew she had to act carefully, not just to protect her cover, but to stay one step ahead of Connors. As Sylvia finished her story about negotiating with a stubborn landlord to secure the cafe's prime location, Naomi leaned in slightly, her voice lowering just enough to signal a shift in the conversation. "Sylvia, it's clear you've put your heart into this place, but I can't help noticing that you seemed a little uneasy earlier when Officer Connors came in. Is everything all right?" Sylvia's smile faltered, and for a moment, a flicker of something, fear, guilt, or perhaps frustration, crossed her face. She quickly recovered, brushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Oh, it's nothing. Just not a fan of police showing up out of nowhere, you know. It's bad for business." Naomi nodded sympathetically, her expression softening. "I get it. It can feel intrusive, but he seemed pretty interested in talking to you. Has he been here before? Sylvia hesitated, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. Once or twice. He's persistent, always asking questions about my suppliers, my clientele. Claims it's routine, but it feels like he's fishing for something. Naomi filed that away, her instincts confirming what she suspected. Connors was already circling too close to the truth. That must be stressful. If it's okay with you, I'd like to include something in my article about how minority-owned businesses often face extra scrutiny. It could really shed light on what you've been dealing with. Sylvia's eyes softened, her defensive posture relaxing slightly. That would mean a lot. Sometimes it feels like people don't understand the pressure we're under, just trying to make an honest living. Naomi smiled warmly. Absolutely. I'm here to tell your story. Sylvia. Connors closes in. While Naomi was working to build trust with Sylvia, Connors was still lingering near the cafe entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if cataloging every detail. Naomi noticed him step aside to take a call, his posture tense. Whatever he was hearing seemed to confirm his suspicions. She knew she didn't have much time before he made another move. As Sylvia excused herself to check on a delivery in the back, Naomi discreetly adjusted the volume on her earpiece. Williams, I need an update. Do we know what Connors is working on? Her handler's voice came through softly but firmly. We believe he received an anonymous tip about the cafe being linked to illegal activities. No specifics, but he's definitely looking for evidence. Naomi's jaw tightened. Does he know I'm here? No indication of that yet, but keep your cover intact. If he connects you to the operation, this could spiral out of control. Naomi glanced at Connors, who had finished his call and was now speaking with a barista. She noticed him gesturing toward the back of the cafe, toward Sylvia's office. A surge of urgency coursed through her. If Connors tried to search the office without probable cause, it could alert Sylvia and blow the entire operation. She decided to intercept him. Rising from her seat, Naomi casually approached the counter, pretending to examine the pastry display. Connors noticed her movement and turned, his sharp gaze locking onto her. Officer Connors, Naomi said with a polite smile. I couldn't help but notice you seem pretty interested in this place. Is everything okay? Connors raised an eyebrow, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. Just following up on some leads. And you are? Naomi Carter, she said, offering her hand. I'm a journalist working on a feature about local businesses. Sylvia's Cafe is one of my highlights. Connors shook her hand, his grip firm. A journalist, huh? Interesting time to be writing about this place. Naomi tilted her head, feigning curiosity. Why's that? Connors leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Let's just say there's more to this cafe than meets the eye. If I were you, I'd be careful about who I associate with. Naomi's smile didn't waver, but inside, her mind was racing. Thanks for the advice, officer. But from what I've seen, Sylvia runs a tight ship. I'd be surprised if there was anything shady going on here. Connors shrugged, his expression unreadable. Sometimes people are good at hiding things. You might want to dig a little deeper for your story. As Connors turned to leave, Naomi felt a mix of relief and unease. He was clearly suspicious, but for now, he seemed to have backed off. Still, his warning lingered in her mind. If he was planning to come back with a warrant, or worse, take matters into his own hands, Naomi needed to act fast. Sylvia's confession. When Sylvia returned, Naomi decided it was time to push harder. She couldn't afford to let Sylvia slip away without gaining her trust. Sylvia, Naomi began, her tone serious but gentle. Can I be honest with you? I think there's more going on here than you're telling me. Sylvia stiffened, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Naomi leaned in, lowering her voice. That officer isn't here for routine checks. He's investigating something specific. And from what I can tell, he thinks you're involved. If there's anything you're worried about, now's the time to come clean. Sylvia's face paled, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them on the table. For a moment, Naomi thought she might deny everything. But then Sylvia exhaled shakily, her defenses crumbling. "Okay," Sylvia whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's something I need to tell you." Naomi nodded encouragingly, her heart pounding. "I'm listening." Sylvia glanced around nervously before speaking. "A few months ago, I was approached by a man who offered to help finance the cafe. At first, it seemed like a blessing. I was struggling to make ends meet, and his terms were generous. But then he started asking for favors, small things, like letting his associates use my back office for meetings. I didn't think much of it until I realized they weren't just meetings." Naomi kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt a surge of validation. Sylvia was more deeply involved than she realized. "Who is this man?" Sylvia hesitated, her fear palpable. "I don't know his real name. He goes by Victor. He's connected, and if I say anything, I'm afraid of what he'll do." Naomi reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Sylvia's. "Sylvia, you've already taken the first step by telling me this. I promise there are people who can help you, but we need more information. Do you have any records of these meetings? Anything that could link Victor to what's going on?" Sylvia nodded slowly. "There's a ledger in my office. It's hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk." Naomi's pulse quickened. "That's exactly what we need. Can you get it?" Before Sylvia could respond, the door swung open again, and Connors walked back in, this time accompanied by another officer. His eyes immediately locked onto Naomi and Sylvia, and his expression darkened. "Ms. Rodriguez," Connors said, his tone firm, "we need to speak with you in private." Naomi's heart sank. The clock had just run out. The confrontation. The air in the cafe thickened with tension as Officer Connors, now flanked by a younger officer with a cautious demeanor, approached the table where Naomi and Sylvia sat. Sylvia's face went pale, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Naomi maintained her composure, though her mind was racing with possibilities. Connors had returned quicker than she anticipated, and his determination suggested he was ready to escalate. "Ms. Rodriguez," Connors began, his voice firm but measured, "we have reason to believe this establishment may be connected to ongoing criminal activities. I'd like to ask you a few questions in private." Sylvia looked at Naomi, her fear evident. Naomi met her gaze with a reassuring nod, silently signaling her to stay calm. Then she turned to Connors, her expression polite but unyielding. "Officer Connors," Naomi interjected, her voice steady, "I understand you have a job to do, but I hope you realize how disruptive this is for Sylvia and her business. If this is about those routine checks you mentioned earlier, surely they can wait until after hours." Connors' gaze shifted to Naomi, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Miss Carter, wasn't it? You said you're a journalist." "That's correct," Naomi replied smoothly. "Then you should understand the importance of uncovering the truth," Connors said, crossing his arms. "This isn't just a routine check anymore. I've received credible information that this cafe is being used for illicit purposes. I'm sure you'd want the public to know if a local business was engaging in illegal activities." Naomi's smile didn't falter, though inside she was calculating her next move. "Of course. But as a journalist, I also believe in due process and respecting the rights of small business owners. Do you have a warrant to search the premises?" Connors' jaw tightened. The younger officer beside him shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Connors' lack of a warrant was evident, and Naomi seized the opportunity to press further. "I assume you're aware," she continued, her tone unwavering, "that conducting a search or detaining Sylvia without proper authorization could be seen as overreach. It wouldn't look good for the department if this turned into a public relations issue." Connors narrowed his eyes, his irritation clear. "I'm not here to argue with you, Miss Carter. I'm here to do my job." "And I'm here to do mine," Naomi countered. "Sylvia has agreed to share her story with me for my article. If you have legitimate concerns, Perhaps we can discuss them in a way that doesn't disrupt her business or intimidate her customers. The cafe had gone eerily quiet, with patrons pretending not to eavesdrop while stealing furtive glances at the unfolding scene. Connors seemed to weigh his options before reluctantly stepping back. "Fine," he said grudgingly, "but I'll be back, and next time, I'll have a warrant." With that, Connors turned and motioned for his colleague to follow him out. The tension in the room eased as the officers left, but Naomi knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Connors wasn't backing down. He was regrouping. A race against time. Sylvia let out a shaky breath, her eyes wide with panic. "Naomi, what are we going to do? If he comes back with a warrant, I'm done for." Naomi leaned closer, her voice low but firm. "Listen to me, Sylvia. I need you to stay calm and trust me. We don't have much time, so I need to get that ledger you mentioned. Where is it?" Sylvia glanced toward the back of the cafe. "In my office. Bottom drawer of the desk, under some files. But if Connors sees you—" "I'll handle Connors," Naomi interrupted. "Just keep the staff and customers calm. Act like everything is normal." Sylvia hesitated, then nodded. Naomi stood and moved quickly but casually toward the back of the cafe, her every step measured to avoid drawing attention. She entered Sylvia's office, a small, cluttered space with a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves stacked with inventory records. Closing the door behind her, Naomi locked it and immediately began searching. She pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk and found a pile of invoices and receipts. Beneath them, tucked carefully out of sight, was a worn leather-bound ledger. Naomi opened it, her eyes scanning the handwritten entries. Names, dates, amounts. It was all there. A detailed record of payments and transactions that clearly linked Sylvia's cafe to a larger network. As Naomi flipped through the pages, her earpiece buzzed to life. "Naomi," Agent Williams's voice crackled. "Connors just left the cafe, but he's not going far. We've intercepted radio chatter suggesting he's requesting backup. You need to get out of there before he comes back." Naomi's pulse quickened. "I've got the ledger," she whispered. "It's exactly what we need. But Sylvia's not safe if Connors gets a warrant." "Understood," Williams replied. "Can you extract her?" Naomi considered her options. Sylvia was already on edge, and convincing her to leave would be a challenge, but staying put wasn't an option. "I'll try," she said. "Send a team to my location. We'll need backup." "Copy that. Extraction team en route. Be careful, Naomi." Naomi slipped the ledger into her bag and exited the office, locking the door behind her. She found Sylvia near the counter, attempting to maintain her composure as she served a customer. Naomi approached her, speaking quietly but urgently. "Sylvia, we need to leave. Now." Sylvia froze, her eyes darting to the door. "What? I can't just leave. This is my business. If Connors comes back with a warrant, your business won't matter," Naomi said firmly. "I have what we need to clear your name and expose the real criminals, but we need to move before it's too late." Sylvia hesitated, torn between fear and disbelief. "And go where? What if they follow us?" "I have a safe location," Naomi assured her. "You'll be protected, but we have to go now. Trust me, Sylvia. I'm trying to help you." Sylvia searched Naomi's eyes for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, let me grab my keys." As Sylvia moved to retrieve her belongings, Naomi's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Williams. "Connors is on his way back. ETA 5 minutes." Naomi cursed under her breath. Time was running out. She glanced around the cafe, noting the curious stares of a few patrons who had clearly picked up on the tension. The last thing she needed was a scene. Sylvia returned, her keys in hand, and Naomi guided her toward the back exit. "We're taking the alley," Naomi said. "Stay close to me and keep your head down." A narrow escape. The alley behind the cafe was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the brick walls. Naomi kept a firm grip on Sylvia's arm as they moved quickly but cautiously toward the street. As they reached the end of the alley, Naomi's earpiece buzzed again. "Naomi, Connor's just pulled up. He's entering the cafe." Naomi tightened her jaw. They were cutting it close. She spotted an unmarked black SUV idling a block away, her extraction team. She signaled to the driver, who nodded and opened the rear door. "Get in," Naomi urged Sylvia. Sylvia climbed into the SUV, her hands shaking. Naomi followed, slamming the door behind her. "Go," she told the driver. The SUV pulled away just as Naomi spotted Connors emerging from the cafe, his eyes scanning the street. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Naomi saw the flicker of realization on his face. Connors knew she wasn't just a journalist, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he came after her. As the SUV disappeared into traffic, Naomi turned to Sylvia. "You're safe now, but we're not out of the woods yet. There's more you need to tell me about Victor and his operation." Sylvia nodded, her expression grim. "I'll tell you everything. Just promise me this will end." Naomi met her gaze, her resolve unshakable. "It will, but we have to move fast. Connors won't stop until he gets what he's after." As the city skyline blurred past the window, Naomi knew the next phase of the mission would be even more dangerous. Connors was relentless, and Victor's network was still out there, watching. The clock was ticking, and Naomi would have to use every skill she had to bring them down before they destroyed Sylvia and anyone else in their way. Into the shadows. The SUV sped through the city, weaving in and out of traffic with calculated precision. Naomi sat beside Sylvia, her body tense, but her mind laser-focused. The leather-bound ledger in her bag was a goldmine of evidence, but it wasn't enough to dismantle the intricate network of criminals they were up against. The names in the ledger were only fragments of a larger puzzle, and Naomi needed Sylvia to fill in the gaps. The driver, an experienced agent named Ramirez, glanced at Naomi through the rearview mirror. "We got a safe house about 10 miles out. It's secure, but we'll need to move fast. If Connors puts out an alert, it won't take long for them to track your escape." Naomi nodded. "Understood. Keep us updated if there's any sign of pursuit." Sylvia sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her fear was palpable, but so was her determination. She had finally decided to cooperate, and Naomi knew she had to capitalize on that before doubt or panic set in. Naomi turned to Sylvia, her voice calm but firm. "Sylvia, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to help me connect the dots. The ledger is a start, but we need more. Who is Victor, and what does he want with your cafe?" Sylvia hesitated, her eyes fixed on the passing cityscape. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor's not just one man. It's a name they use to protect the real players. The guy I dealt with called himself Victor, but he's just a middleman. The real power is higher up, someone they call the broker." Naomi's brow furrowed. This was new information, and it explained the complexity of the operation. "The broker? What do you know about him?" "Almost nothing," Sylvia admitted, her voice trembling. "He's a ghost. No one knows his real name, and no one's ever seen his face. All I know is that he runs the entire operation. Drug trafficking, money laundering, even arms deals. My cafe was just one of the many fronts they use to funnel money." Naomi absorbed this information, her mind racing. The broker wasn't just a criminal. He was the architect of a sprawling empire. If they could identify him and dismantle his network, it would be a major victory for law enforcement. "Did you ever meet anyone else in the organization?" Naomi asked. Sylvia nodded reluctantly. "A few. They'd come to the cafe to drop off money or pick up packages. Most of the time, they used coded language and fake names. But there's one guy. He called himself Enrique. He seemed higher up than the others, like he had direct access to the broker. He was the one who gave me the ledger." Naomi's ears perked up at the name. "Do you know where we can find Enrique?" Sylvia shook her head. No, but he mentioned a warehouse once. He said it was where they processed shipments. I think it's somewhere near the industrial district, but I don't know exactly where. Naomi leaned back, processing the information. A warehouse in the industrial district could be the key to uncovering the broker's operation. But it was a long shot, and time wasn't on their side. As the SUV approached the outskirts of the city, Ramirez's voice cut through the silence. "We've got company. Black sedan, 2 cars back. They've been tailing us for the last mile." Naomi's heart sank. "Can you confirm if it's Connors?" "Can't tell," Ramirez replied. "Could be him, or it could be someone from the organization. Either way, they're not here by coincidence." Naomi glanced at Sylvia, whose face had gone pale. "Stay down," Naomi instructed. "Ramirez, lose them." The SUV accelerated, swerving sharply onto a side street. Naomi reached for her sidearm, hidden beneath her jacket. If they were ambushed, she needed to be ready. The black sedan followed, its engine roaring as it tried to close the gap. "Hold on," Ramirez shouted as he veered onto a narrow alley. The SUV barely fit, its tires screeching as it sped through the confined space. The sedan followed but struggled to keep pace. Naomi's earpiece buzzed. "Extraction team to Naomi," came Agent Williams's voice. "We've got eyes on your tail. 2 armed men in the sedan. We're deploying backup. ETA 3 minutes." "Copy that," Naomi replied. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The alley opened onto a deserted industrial park, its wide, empty streets flanked by abandoned warehouses. Ramirez slammed the brakes, bringing the SUV to a sudden stop. "They're too close," he said. "We need to deal with them here." Naomi nodded. "Sylvia, stay in the car. Don't move until I say it's safe." Sylvia nodded, her hands shaking as she ducked below the window. Naomi and Ramirez exited the SUV, their weapons drawn. The black sedan skidded to a stop 100 feet away, its doors swinging open. 2 men stepped out, both armed with handguns. Naomi raised her weapon, her voice ringing out with authority. "FBI, drop your weapons and get on the ground." The men hesitated for a moment, exchanging a glance. Then, without warning, they opened fire. The shootout. Naomi and Ramirez ducked behind the SUV as bullets ricocheted off its metal frame. Naomi returned fire, aiming for the tires of the sedan. Her first shot missed, but the second struck true, deflating the front tire with a loud hiss. "We got them pinned," Ramirez shouted, firing at the men's cover. One of the assailants darted behind a rusted dumpster, while the other retreated to the sedan. Naomi's earpiece buzzed again. "Backup arriving in 30 seconds, Williams reported. "Make it fast," Naomi muttered, her focus unwavering. She peeked out from behind the SUV, assessing the situation. The man behind the dumpster was reloading, his movements frantic. Naomi took her shot, hitting him in the shoulder. He cried out and dropped his weapon, clutching his wound. The second man, seeing his partner incapacitated, scrambled back into the sedan. Ramirez moved to pursue, but Naomi held up a hand. "Wait for backup. Don't risk it." Moments later, a black SUV with tinted windows screeched into the industrial park. 4 FBI agents in tactical gear emerged, their weapons trained on the sedan. The driver, realizing he was outmatched, raised his hands in surrender. Naomi exhaled deeply, her adrenaline still surging. "Secure the suspects and sweep the area," she instructed the team. "I want to know who sent them and why." As the agents moved in, Naomi returned to the SUV and opened the door. Sylvia looked up at her, her eyes wide with fear. "Is it over?" "For now," Naomi said, her voice steady. "But this is just the beginning. We need to get you to the safe house before more of them show up." Sylvia nodded, her trust in Naomi growing stronger. As the SUV pulled away, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a razor's edge. The broker's network was vast, and Connors was still a wild card. Every move they made brought them closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. Naomi glanced at Sylvia, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "You're doing the right thing," Naomi said softly. "We're going to bring them down." Sylvia met her gaze, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I just want this nightmare to end." "It will," Naomi promised, gripping her sidearm tightly. "But first, we have to face it head-on." The road ahead was treacherous, but Naomi was ready for the fight. The web unravels. The safe house was tucked away in the outskirts of the city, hidden among a cluster of aging buildings and overgrown vegetation. From the outside, it looked like any other abandoned warehouse, but inside, it was a secure fortress equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, an armory, and a command center. Ramirez parked the SUV near the side entrance, and Naomi helped Sylvia out, leading her inside. Agent Williams was already waiting for them, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "Good work getting her out," he said, his sharp eyes scanning Sylvia. "We've secured the suspects from the shootout. One's talking, but we haven't cracked the full story yet." Naomi nodded. "We have bigger fish to fry. Sylvia's given us a lead on someone named Enrique and a possible location in the industrial district. But we're running out of time. Connors is circling, and the broker's people won't stop until they've tied up loose ends." Williams's expression darkened at the mention of the broker. "If we don't act fast, Sylvia could become one of those loose ends. Let's get her settled and start working on that lead." Naomi turned to Sylvia, her voice softening. "You're safe here, but we need to move quickly. Anything else you can tell us about Enrique or the warehouse could make all the difference." Sylvia hesitated, her eyes darting between Naomi and Williams. I don't know much more. Enrique always seemed on edge when he came to the cafe, like he was being watched. He mentioned the warehouse once, but he never gave me an exact address. He did say something about Tuesdays being shipment days. If today is Tuesday, they might be moving something right now. Naomi glanced at her watch. It was already past 9 p.m. If there was a shipment happening, they had to act fast. She looked at Williams. "We need to check every warehouse in that area. If we can intercept a shipment, we might get the evidence we need to dismantle this operation." Williams nodded. "Agreed. Ramirez, pull up satellite maps of the industrial district. Let's narrow down possible locations." As Ramirez worked on the computer, Naomi guided Sylvia to a chair in the corner of the room. "Stay here and try to rest. You've been through a lot, but we need you strong for what's coming." Sylvia nodded, her fear giving way to exhaustion. "Just promise me you'll stop them," she whispered. "I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me." Naomi crouched beside her, her voice firm. "I promise. We're going to shut this down." The sting operation. 15 minutes later, Ramirez had narrowed down the search to 3 potential warehouses based on their size, proximity to major roads, and recent utility usage spikes. Naomi, Williams, and a tactical team prepared to move out, armed with the intel and the ledger's damning evidence. Naomi checked her gear, a Glock 19, spare magazines, and a tactical radio. Her heart was steady, her focus unwavering. This was the kind of high-stakes operation she had trained for. As the team prepared to deploy, Williams pulled Naomi aside. "Connors is still in play. He's filed for a warrant to search Sylvia's cafe, and his department is dragging their feet. But it won't be long before he finds out she's gone. If he shows up at the warehouses, things could get messy." Naomi sighed, her frustration evident. "I'll deal with Connors if he gets in the way. Right now, we focus on the mission." Williams nodded. "Let's move." The convoy of black SUVs rolled out into the night, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The first warehouse was empty, its dusty interior showing no signs of recent activity. The second warehouse was locked tight, but a quick scan revealed no heat signatures or vehicles inside. That left the third warehouse. The warehouse showdown. The third warehouse was larger than the others, its high metal walls looming against the night sky. A faint glow emanated from the windows, and the faint hum of machinery suggested activity inside. Naomi's gut told her this was it. The team parked a block away, moving in silently under the cover of darkness. Naomi led the way, her weapon drawn as they approached the side entrance. Through her earpiece, she heard Williams coordinating with the other agents. 2 guards at the north entrance, Williams reported. Thermal imaging shows at least 6 more inside. Possible vehicles and crates near the south wall. Copy that, Naomi whispered. We'll neutralize the guards and secure the perimeter. Naomi motioned for 2 agents to flank the guards at the north entrance. The takedown was swift and silent, the guards subdued before they could raise an alarm. Naomi pushed open the door, her team fanning out as they entered the warehouse. The scene inside was exactly what Naomi had hoped for and feared. Dozens of crates were stacked along the walls, some marked with international shipping labels. A group of men were loading smaller boxes into the back of a truck, their movements hurried. At the center of it all stood a man Naomi instantly recognized from Sylvia's description. Enrique. Naomi signaled for the team to move in, their weapons trained on the men. FBI. Drop your weapons and put your hands in the air. Panic erupted. Some of the men obeyed, their hands shooting up in surrender. Others reached for weapons, and chaos ensued. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the cavernous warehouse. Naomi took cover behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding as she returned fire. She spotted Enrique making a break for the back exit and pursued him, her focus razor-sharp. Williams, Enrique's on the move. She shouted into her radio. On it, Williams replied. Backup en route. Naomi sprinted after Enrique, her footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. He burst through a side door, emerging into the loading dock. Naomi followed, raising her weapon as she cornered him. Freeze, she commanded. Hands where I can see them. Enrique stopped, his chest heaving as he raised his hands. All right, he said, his voice laced with desperation. Don't shoot. Naomi moved closer, keeping her weapon trained on him. You're going to tell me everything about the broker and this operation. Start talking. Enrique smirked, a hint of defiance in his eyes. You think this ends with me? You're out of your depth, lady. The broker knows everything. You can't touch him. Before Naomi could respond, the screech of tires echoed through the dock. A black sedan pulled up, and to Naomi's shock, Officer Connors stepped out, his weapon drawn. Stand down, Carter, Connors barked. He's mine. Naomi's mind reeled. Connors, what the hell are you doing here? This is an FBI operation. Connors' expression was unreadable, but his stance was aggressive. You've been interfering in my case for long enough. Enrique is coming with me. Naomi's instincts screamed that something was off. Your case. Connors, you're not authorized to be here. Step aside. Connors sneered. I don't need your permission. I've been tracking this operation for months. Enrique and his boss are going down, and I'm taking the credit. Before Naomi could respond, Enrique took advantage of the distraction, lunging toward a nearby crate. Naomi reacted instantly, firing a warning shot that stopped him in his tracks. Enough, Naomi shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Connors, back off before you make this worse. Connors hesitated, his arrogance faltering under Naomi's steely gaze. Fine, he muttered, lowering his weapon. But don't think this is over. As Connors retreated, Naomi secured Enrique in handcuffs, her resolve hardening. The web was unraveling, and she was determined to see it through, no matter who tried to stop her. Back in the warehouse, the rest of the team had subdued the remaining suspects. Crates of drugs and money were cataloged as evidence, a testament to the scale of the broker's operation. But Naomi knew this was just the beginning. Enrique was only a pawn, and the real challenge lay in finding the broker before he disappeared into the shadows once again. Facing the puppet master, Naomi paced the secure interrogation room, her nerves taut as she prepared for the next stage of the operation. Enrique sat on the other side of the reinforced glass, his cuffed hands resting casually on the metal table. Despite his capture, he looked remarkably composed. Too composed, Naomi thought, for a man caught in the middle of a massive criminal conspiracy. Agent Williams entered the observation room, a grim expression on his face. The team's still processing evidence from the warehouse. We've got enough to tie Enrique to the operation, but nothing concrete on the broker. He's stonewalling. Naomi turned to Williams, her jaw tightening. We need him to talk. The broker won't wait long to clean house once he realizes we've taken one of his men. Enrique's our best shot at getting to him before it's too late. Williams sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. I know, but he's been playing it cool, denying everything. Claims he's just a low-level errand boy. We both know that's a lie, but without leverage. Naomi stared at Enrique through the glass, her mind working furiously. Let me try. Williams hesitated, then nodded. You've got 10 minutes before we bring in the heavy hitters. Naomi entered the interrogation room, her heels clicking against the cold floor. Enrique's eyes flicked up to meet hers, a sly smile tugging at his lips. Agent Carter, he drawled. I was wondering when you'd show up. You seemed so determined back at the warehouse. Naomi didn't react to his attempt at condescension. She placed a folder on the table and sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Let's cut the theatrics, Enrique. We both know you're not some errand boy. You're a trusted lieutenant in the broker's organization. You've handled millions in illegal transactions, coordinated shipments, and kept the operation running smoothly. But now you're here, alone, with no one to protect you. How long do you think that's going to last? Enrique chuckled, leaning back in his chair. You've got a vivid imagination, Agent. I'm just a guy trying to make a living. You've got nothing on me. Naomi opened the folder, revealing a series of photos taken at the warehouse, crates filled with drugs, cash, and weapons. She slid them across the table. That's not nothing, Enrique. That's enough to put you away for life. But I'm giving you an out. Help us take down the broker, and we'll cut you a deal. Enrique's smile faltered, but only for a moment. You think I'd betray him? You don't know who you're dealing with. The broker doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. You can't protect me from him. Naomi leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. You're right. I don't know who the broker is. But I know this. He sent you to do his dirty work, and now you're the one facing the consequences. Do you think he's going to swoop in and save you, or do you think he's already planning to replace you? Enrique's jaw tightened, the first crack in his facade. Naomi pressed on. You have a choice, Enrique. You can go down as a scapegoat for the broker, or you can help us bring him down. Work with us, and we can protect you. Stay silent, and you'll disappear into a prison cell, or worse. For a long moment, Enrique didn't speak. Then, finally, he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. All right, I'll talk. The trap is set. Enrique's confession was a treasure trove of information. He revealed that the broker operated out of a high-tech office concealed within a legitimate logistics company downtown. The company, called Crestline Global, was the perfect cover, handling international shipping and receiving on a massive scale, while laundering money and coordinating illicit operations in the shadows. Naomi and Williams pored over the details, formulating a plan. Crestline Global's headquarters was a fortress, equipped with cutting-edge security systems and a private security team. A direct raid was out of the question. They needed to lure the broker out. Enrique provided the bait. He agreed to set up a meeting, pretending to deliver a shipment schedule that had been saved from the FBI raid. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot at catching the broker off guard. We're walking into the lion's den, Williams said as they finalized the details. If this goes south, we're not just losing Enrique. We're losing our chance to bring the broker down. Naomi nodded, her expression resolute. We won't let it go south. Let's do this. The final showdown. The meeting was arranged at an abandoned airstrip on the outskirts of the city, a neutral location where the broker's paranoia would be at its lowest. Naomi, disguised as one of Enrique's subordinates, sat in the passenger seat of a nondescript black SUV. Enrique sat behind the wheel, visibly tense. "This is suicide," he muttered. "If they even suspect." "They won't," Naomi interrupted. "Just stick to the script, and we'll handle the rest." A convoy of black SUVs approached, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The vehicles stopped in a tight formation, and a tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out of the lead car. His presence exuded authority and danger, and Naomi knew immediately. This was the broker. "Enrique," the broker said smoothly, his voice calm but laced with menace. "I hear you've had a rough week." Enrique forced a nervous laugh. "Just a small hiccup, but I've got what you need." He handed over a flash drive, preloaded with fabricated shipment data created by the FBI. The broker inspected it briefly before turning his piercing gaze to Enrique. "And who's this?" he asked, nodding toward Naomi. Naomi kept her head down, playing the part of an inconspicuous lackey. "New hire," Enrique said quickly. "Good with logistics." The broker's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he smiled coldly. "Loyalty is hard to come by these days." Naomi's earpiece buzzed softly, Williams's voice coming through. "We're in position. Say the word." Naomi shifted slightly, her hand brushing against the concealed transmitter in her pocket. "Now," she whispered. The airstrip erupted into chaos. Tactical teams emerged from the shadows, surrounding the broker's convoy. Agents shouted commands, weapons drawn, as the suspects scrambled to react. The broker didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to Naomi, his expression eerily calm. "Impressive," he said, "but you've underestimated me." Before Naomi could react, he pressed a button on a small device in his hand. One of the SUVs exploded, the blast throwing Naomi and Enrique to the ground. The broker used the chaos to make a break for his vehicle, but Naomi was already on her feet, pursuing him. She caught up to him just as he reached the driver's seat, her weapon trained on his back. "Don't move," she shouted. The broker froze, then slowly raised his hands. "You've won this round, Agent Carter," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But you'll never dismantle the entire network. Cut off one head, and another will take its place." Naomi's grip tightened on her weapon. "That's not your concern anymore. You're done." Aftermath. The operation was a success. The broker was taken into custody, and Crestline Global's records provided a roadmap to dismantling his network. Over the following weeks, dozens of arrests were made, and millions in illegal assets were seized. Sylvia, now under witness protection, began to rebuild her life. The cafe had been shuttered, but Naomi promised her a fresh start. As for Naomi, she sat in the FBI headquarters late one evening, reviewing the case file. The victory was bittersweet. The broker's words still haunted her. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Agent Williams entered, placing a cup of coffee on her desk. "Hell of a case," he said. "You did good, Carter." Naomi looked up, a faint smile on her lips. "We all did, but there's more work to do." Williams nodded. "Always is." As Naomi returned to her files, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission had been perilous, but it was a reminder of why she had joined the Bureau, to bring justice to the shadows, no matter the cost. The rebirth of shadows. The weeks following the broker's capture were a whirlwind of investigations, arrests, and debriefings. Naomi Carter had poured herself into the case, spending endless hours sifting through Crestline Global's records. While they had taken down the broker and dismantled a significant portion of his network, Naomi's instincts told her the battle was far from over. It wasn't just the broker's parting words. "Cut off one head, and another will take its place." That lingered in her mind. The deeper Naomi dug into the operation, the more she realized the broker had been a central piece, but not the keystone. There were still gaps in the puzzle, missing players whose roles remained shrouded in secrecy. One such player was Spectre, a name that had appeared in encrypted communications between the broker and his associates. Spectre was an enigma, referenced only in fragments but described as someone even the broker feared. If the broker had been the architect of the network, Spectre was its unseen ruler. Shadows within shadows. Weeks had passed since the broker's capture, but for Naomi Carter, the case was far from closed. Sitting at her desk late into the night, she sifted through encrypted files and redacted documents recovered from Crestline Global, the logistics front that had been central to the broker's operations. Despite the FBI's success in dismantling parts of the network, Naomi knew they had only scratched the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was still at play. Agent Williams walked into her office, his expression serious. He placed a thick folder on her desk. "Carter, we've got a problem." Naomi looked up, her tired eyes narrowing. "What kind of problem?" Williams sat across from her, his tone low. "The broker isn't talking. He's refusing to cooperate, and every time we think we've cornered him, he throws us off. Our cyber team flagged a series of communications buried in Crestline's system, highly encrypted. It's a failsafe." Naomi frowned. "Failsafe for what?" Williams slid the folder toward her and flipped it open. Inside were satellite images, maps, and transaction records. "We think the broker anticipated his capture. These files point to a secondary operation, a contingency network that's still active." Naomi's pulse quickened. "How active?" "Active enough to already start moving the assets we seized. Drugs, weapons, cash. It's disappearing from our evidence storage facilities. Someone on the inside is helping them." Naomi's stomach sank. "A mole. Do we know who?" Williams shook his head. "Not yet, but we've got a name, or at least a code name. The Wraith." Naomi leaned back, her mind racing. "The Wraith." Williams nodded grimly. "Whoever they are, they've been one step ahead of us. They knew about the Crestline raid before it happened, which means they might have warned the broker's network. This isn't over, Carter. It's just getting started." The hidden trail. Naomi dove headfirst into the new lead, her instincts driving her to uncover the truth. She studied the encrypted communications and transaction logs, looking for patterns. The name The Wraith appeared in multiple messages, always tied to critical decision points. Asset transfers, personnel movements, and even surveillance notes on the FBI's activities. As Naomi delved deeper, she began to notice a disturbing trend. The Wraith wasn't just coordinating logistics, they were manipulating events. A series of anonymous tips to local law enforcement had derailed several FBI operations. Suspects who should have been caught slipped through their fingers. Evidence that should have been secure vanished. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. The Wraith wasn't just a mole. They were a puppeteer. Late one night, Naomi's computer beeped with an alert. A backdoor encryption tool she deployed had cracked part of a message chain between the Wraith and an unknown associate. The decrypted text chilled her to the core. Phase 2 is in motion. Eliminate liabilities. Ensure the Bureau's attention stays diverted. Naomi immediately forwarded the message to Williams and activated her secure line. "Williams, we've got a situation. The Wraith isn't just covering tracks. They're targeting witnesses." Williams's voice was sharp. "How many witnesses?" "Potentially all of them," Naomi replied, "including Sylvia." A race against time. Naomi and Williams scrambled to reach Sylvia, who was still in protective custody. They arrived at her safe house in the dead of night, accompanied by a tactical team. The scene was eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the cold wind. When they entered the house, Naomi's heart sank. The guards stationed at the entrance were gone, their radios abandoned on the floor. The lights flickered ominously as she moved through the rooms, her weapon drawn. "Sylvia?" Naomi called, her voice steady despite the dread building in her chest. A faint sound came from upstairs, a muffled cry. Naomi sprinted up the staircase. Williams close behind. They burst into the master bedroom to find Sylvia tied to a chair, her face pale but unharmed. "Naomi," Sylvia gasped, tears streaming down her face. "They were here. They took everything." Naomi quickly untied her, scanning the room for any signs of the intruders. "What did they take? What did they say?" Sylvia clutched Naomi's arm, her voice trembling. "They knew about the ledger. They said if I didn't give them the key codes, they'd kill me. I didn't tell them anything, I swear." Williams knelt beside them. "Key codes? What key codes?" Sylvia's eyes darted to Naomi, her voice barely above a whisper. "The codes Enrique gave me before he disappeared. He said they were a backup plan, something that could bring everything down if the broker ever turned on his people." Naomi's breath caught. "Do you still have them?" Sylvia nodded. "They're hidden at the cafe, in the safe under the counter." Williams cursed under his breath. "If the Wraith's people were here, they'll go to the cafe next. We need to move." The final confrontation. Naomi, Williams, and a tactical team arrived at the cafe just as dawn broke over the city. The normally cozy shop was shrouded in an eerie stillness, its windows dark and uninviting. Naomi motioned for the team to spread out, her weapon drawn as she led the charge inside. The cafe had been ransacked. Tables were overturned, shelves emptied, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. Naomi moved to the counter, where Sylvia had said the safe was hidden. Sure enough, a small battered safe was bolted to the floor. Its door was still intact. "I've got it," Naomi said, waving Williams over. As she worked to open the safe, a sudden noise from the back of the cafe drew her attention. Footsteps. She signaled to the team, and they fanned out, weapons at the ready. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall man in a black suit, his face partially obscured by a hood. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew he was in control. "The infamous Agent Carter," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "I was wondering when we'd meet." Naomi leveled her weapon at him. "You must be the Wraith. Surrender now, and this doesn't have to get worse." The Wraith smirked, his hand hovering near his side. "Worse? Oh, Agent, this was never about stopping me. This was about keeping you busy." Naomi's blood ran cold as she realized what he meant. "Williams," she shouted. "It's a trap. Get out now." Before anyone could move, a deafening explosion rocked the cafe, shattering the windows and throwing Naomi to the floor. Smoke filled the air as alarms blared, and Naomi's ears rang from the force of the blast. She struggled to her feet, her vision blurred, and saw the Wraith disappearing through the chaos. "No," she shouted, staggering after him. But by the time she reached the alley, he was gone. Aftermath and resolution. The cafe was a smoldering ruin, but the safe had survived the blast. Inside, Naomi found the key codes Sylvia had mentioned, encrypted files that detailed the full extent of the broker's network and the Wraith's role within it. In the days that followed, the FBI used the codes to dismantle several major operations, arresting dozens of the broker's associates. But the Wraith remained elusive, his identity a mystery. For every piece of the puzzle Naomi uncovered, new questions emerged. As Naomi stood in the ruins of the cafe one final time, she felt a mix of triumph and frustration. The fight wasn't over, but the scales were tipping in their favor. She thought of Sylvia, now relocated to a new safe house, and of the countless lives affected by the criminal empire they were working to dismantle. Williams approached her, his expression grim but hopeful. "You did good, Carter. We've dealt a major blow to the broker's network. But the Wraith, he's still out there." Naomi nodded, her resolve unshaken. "We'll find him, no matter how long it takes." As the sun set over the city, Naomi walked away from the wreckage, ready to continue the fight. The shadows were deep, but she was determined to bring the light into the depths. The city skyline was bathed in twilight as Naomi Carter sat in her dimly lit office, staring at the encrypted files pulled from Sylvia's safe. Every line of code felt like a cipher within a cipher, a maddening maze that refused to give up its secrets. The Wraith had orchestrated this network with precision, leaving breadcrumbs designed to mislead anyone who dared to follow. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was Agent Williams. "We've decrypted part of the files," he said without preamble. "There's a connection to an offshore account in the Caymans. The funds are being funneled into a series of shell companies, and guess what? One of them traces back to a defense contractor right here in the city, Argus Solutions." Naomi sat up straighter. Argus Solutions. They're one of the biggest private contractors in the country. If the Wraith has ties to them, we're looking at something much bigger than drugs or money laundering. "Exactly," Williams replied. "We've also linked a series of recent cyberattacks on federal agencies to their infrastructure. It's not just about the money anymore. The Wraith is leveraging these companies for access and influence. This is about power." Naomi's mind raced. Argus Solutions had deep ties to government contracts, including high-level security clearances. If the Wraith was embedded in their operations, the implications were staggering. "We need to get inside Argus," she said. "If the Wraith is using them as a front, we'll find evidence there." Williams hesitated. "Getting in won't be easy. They've got top-tier security, both physical and digital. And if the Wraith is watching, one wrong move could blow the whole operation." Naomi's lips thinned into a determined line. "Then we make the right moves." The plan. The next morning, Naomi stood in the FBI's operations room, surrounded by a team of agents and analysts. A holographic blueprint of Argus Solutions headquarters hovered in the center of the room, its intricate layers of security displayed for everyone to see. Ramirez, the tech specialist, pointed to the top floor. "This is their executive suite. If the Wraith is operating from Argus, they're likely working out of here. The server room on the 15th floor is where their encrypted communications hub is located. That's our target." Williams nodded. "We'll need a two-pronged approach. A covert team will infiltrate the server room, while a distraction team keeps security occupied." Naomi studied the layout. "I'll lead the covert team. If the Wraith is in that building, I want to be the one to bring them down." Williams frowned. "You sure about that?" "After the café." "I'm sure," Naomi interrupted, her voice firm. "This ends now." Infiltration. 2 nights later, the team was in place. Dressed in tactical black, Naomi and her team approached Argus Solutions under the cover of darkness. The distraction team initiated their part of the plan, triggering a fake fire alarm in one of the lower floors to draw security away from critical areas. Naomi, Ramirez, and 2 other agents entered through a maintenance hatch, their movements silent and precise. The building's corridors were a labyrinth of glass and steel, but Naomi had memorized the layout. They reached the 15th floor without incident, bypassing security cameras with pre-programmed loops fed into the system by Ramirez. The server room door loomed ahead, its keypad glowing faintly in the dim light. Ramirez got to work, plugging in a device that bypassed the biometric scanner. 30 seconds, he whispered. Naomi scanned the hallway, her weapon at the ready. Every nerve in her body was on high alert. She knew the Wraith wouldn't leave such a critical location unguarded. The lock clicked, and the door slid open. Inside, rows of servers hummed with activity, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow. Ramirez immediately began accessing the systems, inserting a data mining drive designed to copy and decrypt the files on the mainframe. "We're in," he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Give me 5 minutes." "You've got 3, Naomi replied, her eyes scanning the room. Something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. A faint sound reached her ears. Footsteps. She signaled to the team, and they took defensive positions. The door to the server room slid open, and 3 armed men in tactical gear burst in. "Contact," Naomi shouted, diving behind a server rack as gunfire erupted. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the metal casings, and the room filled with the acrid smell of burning wires. Ramirez crouched low, clutching the data drive. I need more time. Naomi fired back, her shots precise. One of the intruders fell, but the others pressed forward, their movements coordinated. Whoever they weren't ordinary security. They were professionals. We're out of time, Ramirez shouted, pulling the drive from the console. I've got what we need. Naomi nodded. Fall back. Move. The team retreated, fighting their way back to the stairwell. Naomi covered their escape, her pulse pounding as she took down the last of the attackers. As they reached the exit, the building's alarm system blared to life. The Wraith revealed. Back at the FBI headquarters, Ramirez plugged the drive into a secure terminal. Lines of code streamed across the screen as the data decrypted. Naomi and Williams watched in tense silence. Finally, the screen displayed a series of names, transactions, and locations. At the top of the list was a familiar name, Mark Connors. Naomi's blood ran cold. Connors. Williams looked equally shocked. The Wraith is Connors. Naomi stared at the screen, her mind racing. Connors had been in the periphery of their investigation for months, always just outside the line of suspicion. His relentless pursuit of Sylvia, his interference in the warehouse raid. It all made sense now. He's been playing us from the start, Naomi said, her voice low, using his badge to stay one step ahead. Ramirez scrolled through the files. There's more. He's planning another operation, a massive data heist targeting federal servers. If he pulls it off, he'll have access to everything. Classified files, undercover agent identities, national security protocols. When? Williams demanded. Tomorrow night, Ramirez replied. He's using a private facility in the suburbs. It's heavily fortified. Naomi clenched her fists. We end this. No more shadows. The final strike. The following night, Naomi led a team to the facility, a sprawling compound surrounded by high walls and patrolled by armed guards. Drones hovered overhead, feeding real-time intel to the FBI's command center. Naomi moved through the compound with deadly precision, her team neutralizing guards and disabling security systems. As they breached the main building, they found Connors in a control room, orchestrating the data heist. He turned to face them, his expression a mix of anger and resignation. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. It's over, Connors, Naomi said, her weapon trained on him. Step away from the console. Connors smirked. You think you've won. Even if you stop me, there are others. The system is too big, too corrupt. You're just a cog in the machine. Maybe, Naomi replied, but I'm a cog that fights back. Connors lunged for the console, but Naomi fired, her shot grazing his shoulder and knocking him to the ground. The team secured him, shutting down the data heist before it could begin. As Connors was dragged away, he sneered at Naomi. You'll never stop it. The Wraith is just an idea. And ideas can't die. Naomi stared after him, her jaw set. Maybe not, but people like you can. Epilogue. A New Dawn. With Connors in custody, the FBI dismantled the remnants of the broker's network. Sylvia, now safe in a new location, sent Naomi a heartfelt letter of thanks. The city slowly began to heal, but Naomi knew the fight against corruption and crime was far from over. One evening, as she walked through the city streets, she thought about Connors' final words. The Wraith might have been more than one man, but Naomi was more than one agent. She was part of a team, a system that, for all its flaws, stood for justice. And as long as she drew breath, she would ensure that justice prevailed. The shadows were vast, but Naomi Carter was ready to face them, always.